Good morning, and my name is Andy Harrison, and I'm from the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. Welcome to today's webinar on working safely during coronavirus. This webinar offers guidance to help employers, employees, and the self-employed working in construction and other outdoor work to understand how to work safely during the coronavirus pandemic. A quick housekeeping point before we start. There are controls at the bottom of your screen to pause the session and for adjusting video quality and sound. You can ask questions during the webinar by selecting the Q&A symbol on the right-hand side of your screen, typing your question in the Compose box, and then selecting Send. As every business is different, we can't answer questions or give advice on exactly how you should implement the guidance in your specific circumstances, but we can collect your feedback and input on how useful the guidance is for your business and areas we might want to develop in any future iterations. A recording of the webinar and links to the useful information will be circulated to all participants later today. The purpose of today's webinar is to give you a practical framework to think about what you need to do to continue or restart operations during the COVID-19 pandemic. To help you do this, guidance for business has been prepared by the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy with input from firms, from unions, industry bodies and the devolved administrations in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, and in consultation with Public Health England and the Health and Safety Executive. This guidance applies to England. The links to this guidance and for the guidance for Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, search for Working Safely During Coronavirus on gov.uk. We expect that this guidance will be updated over time. You should check for updates at www.gov.uk/working safely. This guidance should provide a practical framework to think about what is required to continue or restart operations. The guidance does not supersede any legal obligations relating to health and safety, employment, or equalities. Each business will need to translate this into the specific actions it needs to take, depending on the nature of the business, including the size and type of business, how it's organised, operated, managed, and regulated. You could also consider any advice that's been produced specifically for your sector, as well as providing guidance to businesses on working safely during coronavirus. The government is supporting businesses and their employees with a package of measures during this period of unprecedented disruption. The Coronavirus Business Support Hub brings together all government guidance on running your business. To visit the hub, search Business Support on gov.uk. There you can use the Business Support Finder tool on gov.uk to see what support is available for you and your business. Answer 9 simple questions to receive a list of the support your business may be entitled to. Gov.uk is where you will find written guidance to help employers, employees and the self-employed understand how to work safely during the coronavirus pandemic. 8 guides have been published covering a range of different types of work. Many businesses operate more than one type of workforce, such as an office, a factory, and a fleet of vehicles. You may need to use more than one of the guides as you think through what you need to do to keep your people safe. You can view all the written guidance at www.gov.uk/working safely. Further guidance will be published as more businesses and parts of businesses are able to reopen. So today's webinar is designed to be relevant for people who work in construction and other outdoor work, including in energy and utilities, farming and agriculture, forestry, waste management, other infrastructure, railway services, and street and highway services. I'm delighted to be joined today by Andrew Wall, who will introduce the guidance on how to work safely in these environments, looking at practical considerations of how the guidance can be applied in the workplace. So today we'll cover how you might assess and manage risk, who should go to work, how to enable social distancing at work, managing non-staff at your workplace, including customers, visitors and contractors, how to reinforce your cleaning measures to reduce transmission risk, PPE and face coverings in your workplace, managing and communicating with your workforce, and handling inbound and outbound goods. I'll now hand over to Andrew. Andrew.
Safety is paramount to Persimmon, and we have introduced changes to the way we are asking everyone to work. A comprehensive COVID-19 policy has been put together and thoroughly tested on our sites. These procedures tell our workers: travel to site alone where possible and avoid public transport, avoid close working and contact with others, work alone or keep to your own gang, maintain at least 2 meters from others wherever possible whilst working, avoid stopping and chatting to people on walkways and use passing points. Wherever possible, bring pre-prepared meals and refillable drinking bottles from home. Stay on site and don't use local shops. In the canteen area, sit 2 meters apart and dispose of your own rubbish. Practice good hygiene, such as washing hands regularly and avoiding touching surfaces. Don't share tools and equipment where possible. We will continue to follow all government guidance and amend our procedures and protocols accordingly.
So while Andrew is attempting to join us, he's having some technical difficulties. I take this opportunity to outline some of the wider steps that the government is taking to help people travel to work, and on the opening of nurseries, schools and colleges, steps that will also help people return to the workplace. So from this week, commencing the 1st of June, the government has asked primary schools in England to welcome back children in reception, Year 1 and Year 6. Nurseries and other early years providers will also begin welcoming back children of all ages. Secondary schools, sixth forms and colleges will also provide face-to-face contact for Year 10, Year 12 and equivalent 16 to 19-year-old further education students to help them prepare for exams next year. And it's expected that this will begin for them from the 15th of June, with around a quarter of these secondary school students in at any point. And the latest information on the phased reopening of schools can be found at gov.uk. Safe travel guidance is also available, and you should share this with your workforce to help them plan their travel to work during the coronavirus outbreak. Everybody should avoid using public transport where possible, and instead try to walk, cycle or drive to work. Thinking carefully about the times, routes and ways your employees travel will also mean we will have more space to stay safe. The safe travel guidance for passengers can be found at gov.uk. So I'll begin today by talking about assessing and managing the risk of COVID-19. As an employer, you have a legal responsibility to protect your workers and others from risk to their health and safety. You must now make sure that the risk assessment for your business addresses the risks of COVID-19. A risk assessment is part of how you control risks in your workplace, and you can use the guidance produced by the government to help you conduct the risk assessment and put appropriate preventative measures in place. The Health and Safety Executive have useful tools and guidance on conducting a risk assessment, including templates. You should share the results of your risk assessment with your workforce and, if possible, consider publishing the results on your website. We would expect all employers with over 50 workers to publish their risk assessment online. If you have fewer than 5 workers or are self-employed, you don't have to write anything down as part of your risk assessment. All employers should consult their workers on health and safety. Employers have a duty to reduce workplace risks by taking preventative measures. I'll go into more detail about what this means in the context of coronavirus, but broadly, this means increasing hand washing and cleaning of surfaces, working from home where possible, and where this is not possible, maintaining 2-meter social distancing. And for operations where maintaining social distancing isn't possible, considering whether those should continue. Where activities should continue, you should put in place preventative measures to reduce risk, and I'll go into further details about what those measures may look like for outdoor working shortly. It is important to remember that no one is obliged to work in an unsafe environment. Everyone should continue to work from home unless they cannot work from home. While working on site will clearly not be able to be conducted from home, office staff, for example, should work from home if at all possible, and they should be provided with equipment needed to do so safely and effectively. You should plan for the minimum number of people needed on site to operate safely and effectively. Individuals who are advised to stay at home under existing guidance should not physically come to work. This includes individuals who have symptoms of COVID-19, as well as those who have lived in a household with someone who has symptoms. People who are at a higher risk should be protected, and those are clinically extremely vulnerable category who are strongly advised not to work outside the home, clinically vulnerable individuals who are at a higher risk of severe illness and have been asked to take extra care in observing social distancing. Workers in this group should be helped to work from home either in their current role or in an alternative role, and if this is not possible, they should be offered the option of the safest available on-site roles. This is a crucially important point, and further detail is set out in the guidance document. You should monitor the well-being of people who are working from home and help them to stay connected to those operating in an outdoor environment, especially if the majority of their colleagues are on site. In applying this guidance, employers should be mindful to treat everyone in the workplace equally, considering the particular needs of different groups of workers or individuals. It is against the law to discriminate, directly or indirectly, against anyone because of protected characteristics such as age, sex, or disability. For those who do come into work, you must maintain social distancing wherever possible, including on arrival and departure from the workplace. Maintaining social distancing on arrival and departure may require staggering arrival and departure times, introducing multiple entry points, using markings and introducing one-way flow at entry and exit points, defining process alternatives for entry and exit points where appropriate. For example, you might consider deactivating pass readers or keypads at turnstiles in favour of showing a pass to a security personnel at a distance. You should also provide hand washing or hand sanitising facilities at entry and exit points. Social distancing should also be maintained where possible when moving around the workplace. Steps that will usually need to be taken to maintain social distancing while people travel through the workplace include reducing job rotation and equipment rotation, for example, by workers performing single tasks for the day, discouraging non-essential trips within buildings and sites, for example, restricting access to some areas and encouraging use of telephones where permitted. You should implement a one-way system where possible on walkways, and try using signage around the ground or being creative with other objects to mark out 2 meters to allow controlled flows of people moving throughout the site. You might also consider reducing the number of people in attendance at site inductions and consider holding them outdoors wherever possible with social distancing. Sites should be separated into working zones to keep different groups of workers physically separated as much as practical. Use of high traffic areas should be regulated, including corridors, lifts, turnstiles, and walkways. You should plan site access and area of safety points to enable social distancing. Reduce the number of people in attendance at site inductions and consider holding them outdoors and when social distancing is in place wherever this is possible. In outdoor workplaces, it might be rare to have a fixed or static place of work. However, there may be some situations where this is the case. For many who do work in one place, workstations should allow them to maintain social distancing wherever possible. This might require changing layouts to allow people to work further apart from one another. It is also important to maintain social distancing and reduce the risk of transmission in meetings and other common areas. Meetings should be held outdoors where possible. This slide shows 2 meetings being conducted in a socially distanced manner, with participants maintaining 2 meters between each other. Remote working tools should be used to avoid in-person meetings, and only necessary participants should attend and maintain 2 meter separation throughout. For places where meetings take place regularly, use floor signage to help people maintain social distancing. Participants should avoid sharing materials, and hand sanitizer should be provided in meeting rooms. To maintain social distancing while using common areas, you should stagger break times, use safe outside areas for breaks, create additional space freed up by remote working, reconfigure seating and tables to maintain social distancing, and reduce face-to-face interactions. In the case of accidents and other incidents, safety must be prioritised. In an emergency, people do not have to stay 2 meters apart if this would be unsafe. You should minimise the number of unnecessary visits to the workplace by customers, visitors, and contractors. This can be achieved by encouraging visits via remote connection where this is possible, limiting the number of visitors at any one time, determining if schedules for essential services and contractor visits can be revised to reduce interaction and overlap, and maintaining a record of all visitors if this is practical. Where visits are necessary, you should make sure people understand what they need to do to maintain safety, provide clear guidance on social distancing and hygiene, and provide any necessary training for people who act as hosts for visitors. To make sure people understand what they need to do to maintain safety, you may need to provide signs or notices, including providing signage to inform the public of ongoing work, providing signage at entrances to the worksite and on rights of way that cross your workplace to remind the public and workers to maintain social distancing, establishing host responsibilities relating to COVID-19, and providing any necessary training for people who act as hosts for visitors. I'll now move on to talk about cleaning and hygiene in the workplace. You should make sure any site or location that has been closed or partially operated is cleaned and ready to restart. This includes carrying out an assessment for all sites that have been closed and providing cleaning procedures and hand sanitizer before restarting work. Open workplaces should be kept clean to prevent transmission by touching contaminated surfaces. This will require frequent cleaning of work areas and equipment, especially between uses, using your usual cleaning products, and of objects and services touched regularly, such as buckets, site equipment, and control panels. You should sanitize all hand tools, controls, machinery, and equipment after use. Workspaces will also need to be cleaned and cleared, and waste and belongings removed from work areas at the end of shifts. You should also take steps to ensure that everyone keeps good hygiene throughout the day. Steps that will usually be needed to achieve this will include providing additional hand washing facilities, such as pop-ups, particularly on a large site or where there are significant numbers of personnel on site. Providing hand sanitizers in multiple locations in addition to the washrooms. Hand drying facilities should also be provided and either paper towels or electric dryers used. It should also include using signs and posters to build awareness of good hand washing technique, including the need to increase hand washing frequency, avoid touching your face, and to cough or sneeze into the tissue which has been safely, or into your arm if a tissue is not available. You should set clear use and cleaning guidance for toilets to ensure they are kept clean and social distancing is achieved as much as possible, taking special care when cleaning portable toilets. You should also provide more waste facilities and more frequent rubbish collections. If you provide shower and changing facilities, you should set clear use and cleaning guidance to ensure that they're kept clean and clear of personal items and that social distancing is achieved as much as possible. Introduce enhanced cleaning should also be considered during and at the end of the day. You should think about objects and vehicles that come into the workplace and worksite and take action to reduce transmission through contact with these objects. Steps to do this will include implementing cleaning procedures for shared equipment, thinking about tools and vehicles, for example, pallet truck and forklift trucks, encouraging increased hand washing for workers who are handling goods and objects, and regularly cleaning vehicles that workers take home and regularly cleaning reusable delivery boxes. Personal protective equipment, or PPE, protects the user against health and safety risks at work, including items like safety helmets, gloves, eye protection, high-vis clothing, and safety footwear. Where you are already using such equipment to protect against non-COVID-19 risks, you should continue to do so. Additional PPE beyond what you usually wear is not required to protect against COVID-19. While there may be circumstances where wearing face coverings may be marginally beneficial, such as when working in enclosed spacing, this should not be at the expense of other ways of managing risk, including minimizing time spent in contact, using fixed teams, and increasing hand and surface washing. Employers should look at the way work, shift patterns, and working groups are organized to reduce the number of contacts each worker has. As far as possible, where people are split into teams or shift groups, fixing these groups is advised so that contact happens between the same people. Areas should also be identified where people must directly pass things to each other. For example, shared tools or job instructions or materials, and ways to remove direct contact, such as drop-off zones, should be implemented. Consideration should also be given on how to reduce congestion caused by bottlenecks. For example, one-way systems can be used to minimize crowding at entrances or exits. To minimize the risk of transmission during work-related travel, unnecessary travel should be avoided. If this is not possible, it is important to minimize the number of people traveling together in one vehicle. So avoid sitting face to face and increase the ventilation where possible through opening windows. Shared vehicles should be cleaned between shifts or on handover. In the case of delivering to other sites, care should be taken to maintain social distancing and hygiene practices. This could include putting procedures in place to minimize person-to-person contacts, such as using electronic payment methods and electronically signed and exchanged documents, and using consistent pairings where two-person deliveries are required. Where workers are required to travel and stay in on-site accommodation, creating fixed groups of workers will ensure that, where contact is unavoidable, this happens between the same people. Where workers are required to stay away from their home, stays should be logged centrally, and any overnight accommodation should meet social distancing guidelines. You should ensure that all workers understand COVID-19 related safety procedures and keep them up to date with how safety measures are being implemented or updated with clear, consistent, and regular communication. Simple, clear messaging and visible communications should be used to explain any changes, which may include amendments to production schedules, breakdowns, or material shortages. You should provide communication and training materials prior to returning to work. Engage with your workers and worker representatives and place an increased focus on the importance of mental health during times of uncertainty. I now move on to my final slide on inbound and outbound goods. Social distancing should be maintained and surface transmission avoided when goods enter and leave sites. There are a number of steps that may be needed, including revising pick-up and drop-off collection points and reducing the frequency of deliveries by ordering greater quantities of materials. You should also aim to minimise unnecessary contact at gatehouse security or warehouses. Single workers should load or unload vehicles where safe to do so. Where two workers are required, the same pairs of people should be used. Finally, you should enable drivers to access welfare facilities, but encourage them to stay in their vehicles where this does not compromise safety and existing safe working practices. So I hope this information has provided you with a useful starting point for how to think about assessing and managing the risks of COVID-19. You should refer to the full guidance documents as you think about practical operations and considerations of how it could be applied in your workplace, depending on the nature and operations of your business. So let me just check with my producers whether Andrew is online. Has he been able to join us? Is he online?
It's possible. Can you hear me?
Yes, Andrew, welcome back. I'm sorry you've had problems.
There we go.
I thought what we'll do now is people have been sort of posting questions as we've gone through that. So I think what our producers have done, they've curated them into common questions that business are raising on the guidance. So if it's okay with you, we'll try those. Okay. So the first question that we received is some questions about the use of PPE on site. What should businesses think about in the context of coronavirus?
Well, look, PPE is equipment that will protect the user against health safety at work, and many businesses in this group will already be familiar with the use of PPE, such as helmets, gloves, eye protection, high-vis, safety footwear, harnesses, and it can also include respiratory equipment, such as face masks, which are used to manage dust and spray in industrial contexts. So you may already be using PPE in your work activity to protect against non-COVID-19 risks. And the message from us is that you should continue to do so. Workplaces should not encourage the precautionary use of additional PPE to protect against COVID-19. And the reason for that is simply that face coverings are not a replacement for other ways of managing COVID risks in the workplace. The measures that Andy's been telling you about today, they're the best ways of managing the COVID risks. So your social distancing, your hand washing, etc. Face coverings are not a replacement for these. And that's why we don't recommend their precautionary use in addition to existing PPE that you already have to use.
Thanks, Andrew. So moving to another area, we've received a question, or we've seen questions on how long does the virus live on surfaces, and what does that mean for cleaning?
So the infection risk from coronavirus following contamination of the environment does decrease over time. It's not yet clear at what point there is no risk, but studies of other viruses in the same biological family suggest that in most circumstances, the risk is likely to be reduced significantly after around 72 hours. So the risk of infection depends on many different factors, including the type of system being contaminated, the amount of virus that's been shed from the individual, and the time that the individual spent in that setting.
Sorry, Andrew, the sound is a bit bad, and you do keep on breaking up, and we really can't hear you. So fortunately, my producers have sent through some of the answers that you had. So I think what you were trying to say was that the risk of transmission of the virus is also lower in outdoor and more open spaces. And as I mentioned earlier in the webinar, increasing hand washing and cleaning of surfaces is a key way of managing the risk of transmission. I'll tell you what, there are a couple more questions, and I will take those myself, and I'll just, because the line is so bad, it just provide the answers as well. So we've had a question that's come in about travelling in work vehicles. where it's not possible to maintain a 2-metre distance. So the answer to that is, if workers have no option but to share a vehicle and it's not possible to keep a distance of 2 metres, good ventilation by keeping the windows open and facing away from each other may help to reduce the risk of transmission. Where possible, consider seating arrangements. And I know in one of the slides we actually sort of showed what seating arrangements look like to optimise distances between people in the vehicle. People should sit back to back or side to side rather than face to face wherever possible. And I mentioned that we have that distance. Shared vehicles should also be cleaned between shifts or on handover, with particular emphasis on handles and other surfaces which may be touched throughout the journey. So I think the final question that we have is about workers who are displaying symptoms and what test and trace system actually means for employers. Well, employers should support workers who need to self-isolate, and they must not ask them to attend the workplace. Workers will be told to isolate because they have coronavirus symptoms and are awaiting a test result, have tested positive for coronavirus, are a member of the same household or someone who has had symptoms or has tested positive for coronavirus, or have been in close recent contact with someone who has tested positive and received a notification to self-isolate from NHS Test and Trace. When someone first develops symptoms and orders a test, they will be encouraged to alert the people that they have had close contact with in the 48 hours before symptom onset. If any of those close contacts are co-workers, the person who has developed symptoms may wish to, but is not obliged to, ask their employer to alert those co-workers. At this stage, those close contacts should not self-isolate. If the person who has symptoms has a positive test result for COVID-19, the NHS Test and Trace service will ask them to share information about their close recent contacts. Any non-household contacts who need to self-isolate will be contacted by the NHS Test and Trace service. They will receive a formal notification either by phone call, letter, email or text message, setting out how long they need to self-isolate for. If multiple cases of coronavirus appear in a workplace, an outbreak control team from either the local authority or Public Health England will, if necessary, be assigned to help the employer manage the outbreak. Employers should seek advice from their local authority in the first instance. So that ends our question and answer session for today. I'm sorry about the technical problems, but it's the nature of the game in this day and age at the moment. Later this week, we will circulate further information on popular questions that have been asked across this series of webinars. A recording of the webinar and links to useful information will also be circulated to all participants later today. As we expect that this guidance will be updated over time, you should also continue to check for updates at www.gov.uk/working safely. And to stay up to date with the latest business information on coronavirus direct to your inbox, sign up to the Coronavirus Business and Employers Bulletin. You can also contact the government's business support helplines, and you can find all coronavirus business support information on gov.uk. It just remains for me to thank Andrew, who tried valiantly to join us today, but also to thank you for joining us today. Goodbye.